What's going on, everybody? It's Matt, aka the Lumberjack Landlord. Super excited to actually have a viewer as a guest. And this is somebody that I actually, when I first broke into YouTube, I was watching him in his career as a real estate agent in the southern Detroit area and the burbs of Detroit. And I just love what this guy was posting. And I was like, this guy is going to be it in the next couple of years. He's going to be making it happen. And so, as always, we love it when our folks class up the joint instead of my t-shirts, hat, and straggly beard. We love it that he's just bringing the fire and the heat all in that amazing suit. I remember the 10 years I had to do that. Hard pass for me now. But everybody, welcome Nick Ottenbacher to the show. Nick, how are you doing, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing amazing, man. I love the intro. I'm all juiced up now after hearing that. And I was telling you before we jumped on camera, I've been watching you through, really since COVID, all these videos, and it feels like I know you, but you're talking to a stranger. But it's nice to jump on camera and get this relationship going.
It's better meeting this way, because when I've met people in restaurants that I didn't know, and they're like, oh, yeah, I want your stuff. I'm like, that's awesome. And I'm not sure if it was somebody that I said something objectionable to that I'm going to take a swing. So it's kind of like my hands come up like a little bit, and maybe it's to shake them, or maybe it's just to do this. So I never know which. But what I wanted to talk to you about, Nick, is because, so you're a younger guy in your 20s. You started this, this journey kind of a few years ago. Wanted to kind of have you talk to folks about that, because I think that the thing that I hear most often is, oh, it can't be done, or oh, I'm too young, or oh, I'm too old, or oh, I've been in a career too long. Just talk to me a little bit about kind of how you got started in real estate, and then kind of what that light bulb moment was for you.
Yeah, so right out of high school, I think like a lot of people nowadays, you're kind of pushed into college, and that's what I kind of just walked into. And I was probably a year or two, 2 years in, and real estate was always a big interest to me. So I started reading, the Robert Kiyosaki and, a bunch of books and whatnot. And then one summer I kind of was like, you know what, let me try real estate. So I'm just typing in on Google, real estate near me. And I don't know what real estate is, retail, investing, whatnot. So I end up, walking into a few offices, get my license at 19. And that's kind of where the journey began for me. And it's been really, I think when people think about, real estate too, it's not just a get rich quick. I like to hear it's a get rich for sure. And I think a lot of it is the longevity that you're in the business. Because for me, it definitely didn't start out, making great money and that sort of thing. I think my first few years I made like $7 grand, and then 20 grand, and then 30 grand. And now the past few years selling, 55, 60 homes a year. So my income's gone up quite a bit. But more so, to fast forward to my investing journey, I actually haven't really bought a house until, last year. And I was probably, even having my license for so long, probably the most skittish buyer. I'd been in contract, out of contract on probably 5 or 6 homes the past 2 years. And I think, watching your content, it's definitely helping increase my confidence and being able to purchase those homes. And now, more focused on improving the inventory that I got on that end.
Sure. So one of the things I think is really important for folks is everybody, even though you're in the business and even though you're working the 9 to 5, right? And we know in real estate, it's more like 7 to 9, i.e. AM to PM. Because I know that's how late I call my broker. In fact, I think a couple of weeks ago, it was like 10:30 at night, because that call had to happen. So it's one of those things where it's really like kind of an on-call job. But what was it that you looked at in kind of the career path? And what was it that said, you talked a little bit about kind of not get rich quick, but get rich for sure. What was kind of that light bulb moment where you look at it and you say, I need something to augment my $7,000, $20,000 income, right?
Yeah, I think a lot for me, and I think a lot of people get this, it's the passive income, being able to live a lifestyle where you can, live where you want and earn that income no matter where you're living. And for me, in the past few years, I'm recently got engaged and, going to be starting a family here soon. And I think for me, one thing that's important is, having that freedom where it's, where the kids are, winter vacation or whatever, Christmas break, and we can go buy an Airbnb for a month, and kind of live there during those kind of off seasons and whatnot. So I think that was kind of the biggest allure for me, getting that freedom to buy my time back instead of just, working in some job that I'm not happy with for the next, 40 years.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, as you know, it's a storied history for me. I've got 25 years, 20 coming up on 26 years in tech. And it's been a great ride, but I've got a lot fewer years left than I had when I started. So
I think a few more months, I heard you say earlier.
hoping. Yeah, I think certainly is the goal. That hence it was more easily justifiable to Mrs. Lumberjack increasing the portfolio when she was like, we don't have a lot of free time. And I was kind of like, you're exactly right, but we can completely change that if I get rid of a 50-hour-a-week job. And so that was a big change. And so you made you made the jump from, hey, I'm a real estate agent, I'm doing deals, recognizing that I think one of the things that people miss very often is even when you're working it, you're pushing hard, you're trying to do the work, 7,000, 20,000, maybe 35 to 50,000. And then year 4, it really starts to take root. I think a lot of people don't understand. It's one of the reasons that I say, investing in is really hard. And then that first 5 years, it sucks. It's the same thing in starting a career. That first 3 to 4 years is really, really, really hard. You get used to ramen and beans and all the fun, PB&J, making them a loaf at a time with 3-day-old bread. Not that I've ever done all that. But that's one of the big things that we saw. And so when you start to make that transition kind of into investing, is your idea self-manage? Is your idea, I want to, basically hire a property manager? Like, how are you trying to structure your deals? What are you wanting to build your business to be?
Yeah, I think long term, like a lot of people, I think eventually getting to the property manager route where it's completely hands off would be ideal. I think for me, as being a real estate professional, I think I do have an advantage, finding tenants, putting tenants in place with all the contracts and whatnot with my knowledge. So I think right now, everything is self-managed for me. And that's why I kind of more so gravitate to a lot of your content. Even the things that you talk about with, a lot of the fixtures and a lot of the material that you use with your recent videos, I think something that, applies a lot and something that I've been using when we're, fixing up some of these or building some of these other properties as well. So that's kind of the trajectory for me, though, is definitely self-managed, and then, possibly in the future can look at other options.
Yeah, I think the power becomes that you're making the decisions. It's your business. You're operating it. It's being done exactly the way you want. You see what's working. You see what doesn't. You also, I think a lot of people underestimate that sixth sense that they have when they see a tenant. There are those tenants that look great on paper where you're just like, yeah, there's something. They're not telling me something. And it's one of those things where when you have a bunch of people to choose from, you're able to down select or select outside of that. When you don't, that becomes a challenge. But when you're just doing that with a property manager, sadly, most property managers only guarantee the first 30 or 60 days. And then after that, you're done. And it's like, I worked with a property manager. It was a total nightmare. And we tried to do it for the couple of properties, the 2-3 plexes that we owned about an hour and 15 minutes away. And without the shadow of a doubt, those people, all the tenants that they placed in the course of about a 4-month period, all of them lasted no longer than 3 months, just long enough where I couldn't get a refund back. And the company was like, that's our policy. And I was like, you know what my policy is? To fire sucky property managers. That's my policy. So you're fired. They just weren't doing the work. So I love and appreciate that. The thing that you were referring to is the Lumberjack Landlord product review series. We put a lot of work into that. We don't recommend any products. There's a playlist on the channel. We don't recommend any products we don't use ourselves. That's why we're not popping up a product every week, because we're not getting sponsored to pop up a product. We like to go shopping for it. When we buy it, we get that product. And then we make that available in the video because we're like, hey, we look for the best price and we know the best product. And this is what's working for us. That's really cool. When you look at the self-management aspect, so in your area, one of the things that Mike Zuber talks about in One Rental at a Time is kind of the average, the good, and the great deals. What are those levels that you're seeing in your market?
Yeah, so right now, in a lot of the properties I've been buying are single family. I do definitely would love to get in more of the, multifamily, but, in my area, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot until I start expanding my radius. But when we're looking at the single family, really you're looking at about a 6% return, on the lower kind of starter homes. And obviously as the prices go up, they get less and less affordable. And even with the most recent rate hikes, with investors in the 7% now, it is getting more difficult to kind of even find a positive cash flow property.
Yep, perfect. And so do you, in your area, are there small multifamily, duplex, tris, and quads, or is it really predominantly single family?
Yeah, mostly all single family. There's a few of the really, low end areas that I don't necessarily invest in, where you can pick up, 2 3s and 4s, more so like Detroit or right outside Detroit, more of the war zone areas.
Yeah,
But yeah, the in the good, better areas that I like to invest in, they're really few and far between. And even a lot of the cities for the vacant lots, they kind of took away the zoning for multifamily, because they're, don't want to encourage that kind of build. So it's, kind of far and few between for those.
interesting. That's very interesting, because obviously, I mean, then that truly try and drives people to get into the single family homes. The problem is that so many of them are in such bad areas and they're so dilapidated. I've actually, I assume it's not gotten a ton better, but 10 years ago, Detroit was part of one of the sales territories that I had. And so I've
Mhm.
been to Detroit a number of times, and anytime I'm on the road, I always go try and look at real estate because I'm broken like that. And
Mhm.
I remember literally driving streets where it was like, there are 3 houses here that are lived in, and there are 15 that are not. Is that still the same case in a lot of areas out there?
Yeah, and the one thing when you look at Detroit, it's literally, if you put Detroit on a map, there's probably a 20-mile radius. When we had the big boom with cars and whatnot, where they built all these houses to get living for all the workers. And Detroit's such a massive place. When that started going, away, all those homes became abandoned. And and because if you look at Manhattan, I think that's less than 2 miles. So
Yeah,
it's literally, one tenth of the area, and that's kind of the primary reason why Detroit's like that. But yeah, they're certainly, they're doing a lot to fix it. And if you go downtown, it's beautiful and whatnot.
it is.
But for mostly, when you think of Detroit, a lot of those neighborhoods, you're seeing a lot of that still, hasn't come up, just because of the money that would need to be invested to bring it up to par.
Sure. So as you've kind of gone through the journey that you have, becoming a real estate agent and now really understanding kind of how deals work, and then trying to get into, the single family residences you're getting to, like you said, kind of 6, 8, 10 is kind of the breakdown there. Are you, what's kind of the next step for you kind of in the journey that you're taking from a real estate investment perspective? What kind of gets you excited that says, I think this is going to be my next move in my strategy?
Yeah, so my strategy, quite honestly, is very boring. I
Boring is sexy. I'm just telling
yeah, yep. It's really, it's kind of like what you preach and all your boys preach. It's one more at a time. Right now, my portfolio is at 4 homes. Going to be building 2 more.
you.
And,
Awesome.
and for me, it's either looking at possibly building a few more, or just looking for a great deal. Because I mean, in my opinion, I'm only going to be buying 1, 2, 3 deals a year. For me as an agent, I talk to 50 new people every day that's looking to sell their house, but I come across great deals that's over 10,000 contacts over a year. And basically just taking it down one at a time, and in probably 5, 10, 20 years, that kind of snowball effect, and that's how you get that big portfolio. So nothing, I'm not looking at any sexy strategies here or there. It's just the basic: buying another rental, getting it rented, and then moving on to the next one.
Yeah, so we call that in the sales business, we call that A&E, and that's asses and elbows. It's just being in the seat, smiling and dialing, making the calls. And it's funny because in my area, it's much smaller, and so for me, it was amazing because I actually had a broker tell me, they said, we actually had 2 other buyers ask if you were the buyer of the property. And I was like, now I need to start doing things under a disguise, a name, because this is just not going to work. Because I mean, again, we buy kind of the same thing, and we're a broken record. And so if it's a 2, 3, or 4, we are in it, and we know exactly what the numbers need to be. And we are probably one of the larger acquirers now at this point in an area, because I've got a city of 4,000, 15,000, and 30,000. 3 cities that I work in, cities. One of them's a town. But this is the thing, is that it's great. What you're doing is you're creating that reputation in the market. You're constantly reaching out to people. You're constantly having conversations, and that activity will breed activity. So I think that's absolutely awesome. I think the volume of what you're doing is awesome. That number, like 50 a day, even like we talk to people and challenge them to say, hey, 10 a week. And most people don't hit that. Okay, then make it 2 a week. That's at least 100 at the end of the year that you've at least had a conversation about, and do it with purpose. Don't do it just to check the box. So I appreciate you kind of taking me through your journey. What I always like to do kind of towards the end of these interviews is give you a chance to ask me questions, something that I might be able to help you with, or something that you want clarification, because maybe I said something really smart and insightful, but just as big of a chance I could have said something really dumb and stupid. And you're like, why would you think that? And so, believe it or not, there's sometimes it is just stupid, but sometimes there's a method to the madness. And so I wanted to kind of turn the table for you and say, is there anything that you have that I can answer for you?
Yeah. So one big thing that I'm toying with, going back and forth. So far my portfolio, it is with a partner, but we've basically got, 4 properties free and clear, 1 we bought and the other 3 we've built. But we're at the point where everything's free and clear, and our, cash on cash return is right at about 12% with those properties. But then, I run the numbers as if I would have bought them 25% down. Even with the 7% rate, that cash on cash return jumps into the 20%. So from your perspective, with kind of where I'm at, we got 4 in the portfolio, and the yearly cash flow is about 72,000. But knowing we could bring money out and find better deals and increase that cash on cash return, what do you think would be the best next step for me to focus on?
Yeah. So, I mean, a good amount of information, not everything that I always ask, but just we'll kind of deal with some truisms, right? And so from my perspective, the truism always for me is my money working as hard as I am? And so you couldn't work any harder. You're working as many hours as you possibly can, to the point of probably annoying the fiance sometimes. It happens. Building a kingdom and an empire is difficult. That's why most don't do it. But I think to that end, the thing that I always look at is return on my capital, that rock method. And then I also look at something called the buck method, which is best use of capital. Having a bunch of equity sitting there behind in the houses, it depends really what your plan is. If your plan is not to land and expand, mine is land in a new place, expand my footprint, make it so it's then self-sufficient, i.e. it covers the expenses that I have of team that I want to make sure is kind of always involved in. If that's your plan, then you need to be using more leverage. I'm not saying get nuts with leverage, because let's just say some of these crash videos are right, even though I think they're wrong. Let's just say some of them are right, and you might see a 20 or 30% correction. You never want to have to bring cash to the table to close and get out of the asset. However, you also want to make sure that it's still a performing asset. So one of the things that I actually like to do is on properties, I do have a lot of properties that hit my kind of, 70% loan to value ratio. And that's really the ratio we use most often when we're trying to land and expand and grow. What we're doing now with some of the properties that are now getting below essentially like a 50% balance, we're actually just letting those continue to roll down, because now we're in such heavy principal pay down days because those loans are so old. I.e. they're 10 years old or 12 years old, and they might be a 20-year note or a 30-year note, fixed rate debt. I think one of the things that you can do in trying to improve that, in trying to improve your returns, A, it improves your returns, but B, you never know what's going to happen, right? And with the market uncertainty, I think the key thing is having cash. The biggest mistake that I made in 8, 9, and 10 was I didn't have any cash to go pull from. I had some equity, but then that equity disappeared when the market collapsed, basically. What was interesting in that market collapse was then I couldn't pull any money out. In fact, not only could I not pull money out, I couldn't even sell it.
Hmm.
And so, but I got back to the point where I had people paying rent. My famous story of in August before the crash, I had 8 people paying rent. In September, I had 3. In October, I had 1. It took 6 months or so to work through that process. So I had to have reserves. I was literally working my job to pay the mortgages on those buildings for that time when it happened. But that was the greatest collapse in history. And I also made the mistake of renting to a bunch of people that knew each other that were in the same industry, the construction industry. That was a
Hmm.
mistake on my part. So better diversification of my tenants now. So the thing that I always look at again is diversification. I would be looking at, I don't know how it's run in your city, but I would be looking at military installations if there's anything within 20 or 30 minutes. And I'd also be at least starting the conversation with Section 8 and housing authorities. I'd be starting that conversation with them because I think that having diversification of tenant is really going to be important. Obviously, Detroit saw what it was like when the auto industry kind of disappeared or largely reduced. You get all of a sudden all these vacant homes. It's a lot like deindustrialization in Gary, Indiana. They went from 200,000 homes to a bunch of unoccupied homes and having a population of 70 instead of 200,000. The population in Detroit, I think, fell over. It was over 1 million people, right? It was massive.
Yeah, yeah.
So with that, I think the real key that you have to have is you have to have flexibility, i.e., if even in 114 years it hasn't happened, rents may go down. It's possible, not impossible, not probable, but possible. And so I think the big thing is I would just be levering that. I would be levering properties a little bit, not even 70%, but at 50. If you've got hundreds of thousands of dollars tied up in these things, then if you just pull 50%, 50% of that out, that gives you a ton more operating capital and likely is going to pay for your next few. And I think the big thing is that the areas that typically correct the most are the Detroit, Las Vegas, Boise. Those are the areas that really truly correct the most. And then it stays around, it lingers, stays around the longest. So I think the opportunity, if I'm in your shoes, the opportunity that I see is, okay, I can leverage some of these assets to a safe level. I still am going to have significant returns and be in a spot where I don't have to pay, more expensive debt, right? Because I can actually get, decent debt on this, even if it's 7%. Maybe you can't refi for a year or 2 or 3 or whatever. If we go into a deeper recession, they'll cut rates. That's how it works. But I think that having the access to that cash, the adage is absolutely true. When you need it, you can't get it. And so when you don't need it, which is right now, the banks are starting to get conservative. I know one of the big banks in your area, I think, is Flagstar Bank, right? They're pretty big. But I would go with either that's a really big regional bank. But I would look at maybe some of the smaller banks and start to form a relationship. Because that's going to be the most valuable thing you're going to own. And them getting into a position where they have a note on the building for only 50% of the current value of the building, you can push them hard for a really good rate and say, listen, if I don't make my payments, the house is worth only half what you're giving me. If I don't make my payments, you're going to take my house and you have half equity.
Right.
Like it puts them in a position where they're like, it's much lower risk. You already have a renter in there. You're already getting return on that capital. So if it were me, I would probably lever stuff to probably 50%. Take some of that cash, let it simmer. And if in a year and a half, you haven't found a better use, a buck method, better use of that capital, then at that point you pay it down and it costs you some money, but you're still making margin with your tenants paying. So yeah, I think that for me, I think it's making sure you're using your capital, best use of capital, also making sure that you're not over levering the asset. And lastly, is you're going to have income there. So you also want to offset some of your earnings as well. And be positioned to, if there is the correction that I think that there's going to be, which is, 10 to 20% over the next couple of years, if that correction happens, you got a lot of cash. If you find that outrageous deal where somebody's just like, hey, in this area, like it's not a horrible area, but I own 6 or 8 houses and I'm just getting out of that area because I used to own 40. I did that with a landlord. He used to own about 50 units in the area. and he had sold a bunch of them off, but for some reason, the guy that bought that portfolio didn't want this one building. And I just said, you're gonna send your team out there for that one building? Like you're keeping people on payroll for one building? That seems silly. I said, but I don't know what the long-term thing is. And he ended up selling it to me, and it's gonna be a killer building for me because he doesn't know that I own 6 properties within 4 minutes of it. And so it helps me build up the neighborhood more and get some more focus for what we're trying to do. So any thoughts on kind of my thought on investment path?
Yeah, no, I think that's smart because, quite honestly, we, invested a good chunk of our money. I think we got, like 700. We might, have enough for 2 more to get built out, but at that point, it's just going to be, either one path that I've thought about is, at that point, the cash flow is, into the 6 figures. So it's almost like that's buying, half a property a year at that point, and that'll expand. But at the same token, from my partner, his crew, they're on staff right now. And if you're looking, only doing 1 a year, they're not going to get as much use versus refinancing out where they can do 5, 6 projects a year on the side and keep them busy, because we're not going to have that, more cheap labor, in the long term like we do right now. So I do like that. One other quick follow-up question, just a general question. When you are refinancing your properties, I know you mentioned you'll go as far as 70%. You might decide to keep it closer to 50. Do you ever have like a minimum per door that you won't go below if the cash flow isn't strong enough, you won't pull as much out, or okay?
No, for me, what it really comes down to is I don't do per door only because for me, it's the overall return on my capital. The only thing I care about is that return on my capital. So I don't care what the breakdown is per door. I only care that, okay, if I'm putting 100,000, because usually the correlation to doors and dollars is there. And so the key is if I'm only managing the one number, which is it's $100,000 that I'm putting into a deal, I want, based on my model and my area, I want to see at least 20% return on my capital after expenses. And so that's really the number that I'm working at. When you're working with single family homes, that's not really possible. Those numbers aren't attainable unless you're doing the, buying the $5,000 land bank house, you're spending 55 in it, and then you can flip it and sell it for 100. That model I like, because you're not working on having to refi or all this other stuff, but you have to make sure that you're going to lose half of that based on the tax structure. So you have to make sure is that you're basically 1031ing all those and then just buying the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one. So yeah, I think in my eyes, I'm not looking for a price per door. I'm looking for any investment that I'm making on any building. I'm looking for my return on capital and making sure that the capital that I have in the deal, that I'm getting the best use of that capital, i.e. I've got a property now that I've got $400,000 in equity in. I haven't tapped it because I'm in the middle of a project, but as soon as I do, I'll probably tap it. Even if I only tap it for 40%, the tenant's still going to pay for it. It's still, and that's really the key. I don't need all the income that it's produced. Dion's got a great model because he really cares only about the income. He just needs he just needs income. He's not looking to buy the next big deal, the next 5 big deals. So I think that's really the biggest difference. But I think the path that you're on is absolutely awesome. Any other last final thoughts that you'd want to share before we wrap up?
Yeah, no, that's good. I just got to say, I love, it's funny, everything that you guys talk about before I started listening to you, like the way that I communicated with clients and my knowledge of just, income payments, affordability, inventory, and everything like that is so low. And I think if you hear me talk to people, there's like so much picked up from the way that you guys talk, which is hilarious with that verbiage. So I got to say, thank you for the content. Keep it rolling, man.
Man, I love it, Nick. I think you're going to be a rising star in this. I think you're going to have an absolutely beast level portfolio in the next 10 to 20 years. It's slow. It's a slow burn, but it's rich for sure. Not get rich quick. And the only thing that I would tell you is don't rush it. The guys that I see that rush it, like I saw some post yesterday where guys like, I acquired 1,000 units this year in my first year. Like, I hope that nothing bad happens on that deal. But when you're going from never been a landlord to a landlord and 1,000 units, even if it's staff is in place and all this other stuff, you have no idea what you're doing. There's no way that extremely expensive mistakes get made with 1,000. So I think Slow and steady wins a race. I love the model. I love the attitude. I love the hustle. So keep up the hard work. And if anybody can follow you, where can they follow you on Instagram or Facebook to check out and keep in touch with what you're doing?
Yeah, best way to get in touch with me, call or text me, 586-651-9703. And if you need anything in Metro Detroit, reach out anytime or looking to talk some shop. I'm all about it.
Awesome. Awesome. Nick, thank you so much for the time. Congratulations on your engagement. And I'm sure we'll talk again soon. Guys, Lumberjack Landlord here. We always try and create great content for you. We want to share other people's great stories with you. The American dream is still alive and well. Make sure you keep on hustling, doing the work, because there's no substitute for that. We always try and create great content for you. Please hit that like and subscribe button and check us out on our live streams, 11:30 a.m. Eastern time on Sundays. Thanks so much, Nick. Thanks again, and we'll talk again soon.